This one might be a bit too long actually. I might have to split it in two because it's concerning something that I have a lot to say about, and that's romantic relationships, romance in general, where the protagonist is directly involved. The best way to put it is probably that I'm not exactly confident in writing a good one. I have some very specific expectations from romance these days, and certain things, certain tropes that I have acquired a severe allergy to. Drama, namely needless drama, and situations involving previous or even current partners of the current romantic interest of the protagonist are two of those that I really don't want to read about solely as the reader in this, and that takes absolute precedence over me as the writer, even if it is surely going to limit my already quite meager ability to write a decent, readable romantic relationship, especially one involving the protagonist and another character. I might be willing to hint at some romance, and maybe, just maybe, if the spark of inspiration hits me like a truck, I might be able to conjure up an actual romance that I would be happy with as the writer, while also completely avoiding the pitfalls that, if triggered these days, lead to the immediate closing of whatever media they appear in, and all it takes is a single sentence. I am definitely a bit too sensitive about this, but it's absolutely something that I am not going to compromise on unless something drastically changes, as it did, and that change resulted in the current situation, so that even stories that I used to like are now no longer on my rereading list. This is probably only relevant to the protagonist and his romantic relationships, because the triggers to these pitfalls are definitely less sensitive when it comes to side characters and their relationships, and I can see myself having a much easier time navigating those waters when the protagonist is not involved directly. But even then, there are just certain lines that I am unwilling to cross, because even the side characters, they are still my characters that I wrote, and I don't want to just arbitrarily throw them under the bus for the sake of the story and allowing the protagonist to avoid the worst. I think it's better to just dodge it completely, because in the end, writing a story with these aspects, when they are in relation to the protagonist especially, but even to other characters, would defeat the purpose of writing in general, because the goal is to write a story that I would read without feeling bad in the slightest, and that means, at least right now, being very careful around romance. On the other hand, it absolutely doesn't mean that only positive things can ever happen to the protagonist. Quite the opposite of that: loss, injury, even death. But certain things that seem to be almost expected from a portrayal of a romantic relationship make me genuinely uncomfortable and that makes them something undesirable in my stories, at least in the foreseeable future, and that makes writing any sort of romance a bit difficult because I just don't trust myself in avoiding all of that while not turning the romance into a, well, wish fulfillment self insert would be the perfect term, and that makes this whole situation slightly more complicated. On the other hand, I can live without it, so unless I manage to portray the romance vividly enough without the realism of such relationships, I think I'm going to steer clear and focus on writing at least something that won't make my eyes bleed. For now, that's the end of the very long intro, and for the rapid arrows, they managed to reform a friend that fell to the dark side, and he wasn't the only one who's going to get a second chance. When the club members are hanging around on a bridge, a boy sends them a message in a bottle which tells the rapid arrows a location of a buried treasure, remains of a now disbanded club, clear thought. The intentions of the boy who sent the message were not exactly clear though, and he's planning to use the rapid arrows to dig up the treasure and then somehow seize it with any means necessary. So when the rapid arrows arrive at the location with the tools needed, pickaxes and shovels, when they finally reach the chest, they are surprised by a shower of rocks, one of them hitting Indra in the head, causing bleeding, so Mirek stays behind to treat the wounds, and the rest of the boys start the pursuit of the attacker. Determined to catch him at all costs, they climb up a hill and see him running in the distance, Yarka offering extenuating circumstances if he surrenders, and Speedy demands he stops, preferably by giving the ground a kiss. And even though the escaping boy isn't exactly keen on getting caught, he's not exactly given choice, and the boys capture him and escort him back to Mirek and Indra. And meanwhile, the former members of the club Clear Thought are reminiscent of the dissolution of their club. Since it's the anniversary of that event, they decide to go and check up the things they buried under the three conjoined pines, and they wonder what the last member of their club that caused the fissure between the other members and the ultimate downfall of the club is doing, and that they would immediately restore the club if only they had another member they could trust. And while they are on their way, Mirek is currently interrogating the captured terrorist, and the truth comes out that the boy just wanted to seize the remains of the club and just wasn't able to dig them up by himself. The rest of the disbanded club arrives and they immediately notice the unearthed treasure chest, and right after that, the troublemaker Venza, who caused everything. The rapid arrows explain what happened here, then a conference happens, after which they are ready to deliver the judgment. The punishment is to move hand over hand along a large tree trunk that's laid horizontally between two small hills, and if he fails to do so, he has to pick up all the trash from the entire forest. Halfway through the trunk, he's already screaming that he's going to fall and shatter like glass. Mirek tells him to man up, using a Czech idiom, "Stop being such a grandma." The English equivalent would be, "Don't be such a skirt," but then what Speedy added wouldn't really make sense because Speedy said, yeah, be at least a grandpa. So the equivalent in English to make at least some sense would be to say something like at least be pants or at least wear pants, which I think slightly diminishes the value of the idiom. And after Venza finally manages to cross the trunk, he receives forgiveness both from the Rapid Arrows and from his former club members, which leads to him promising that he'll be a good member if the Club of Clear Thought would be willing to re-accept him, and that leads to the resurrection of the disbanded club. And the next plan is to retrieve the relics of the club and start anew. That's it for today. Long intro. I still have more things to say about that exact topic. I'll go back to it in the future. Most probably, I'll repeat something that I've already said multiple times. And for the rapid arrows, there might be some mysticism going on in the next adventure.